I'm delighted to welcome Kenn Joyce to the You and Your Business studio. Hey, Kenn.
Hi, Alec. How are you? Great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
My goodness, we've a lot to cover here, but unfortunately, I'm going to take you down memory lane for the first part of this. Your last year in school, where were you going? Were you the advocate for education, for travel? What were you thinking?
Well, my teachers told me that where I was going was nowhere fast.
Sounds familiar.
I was the guy down the back of the class causing trouble, and the guy at the front of the class, they'd always be saying, sir, can you please ask those boys down the back of the class to be quiet? And I remember one rather wise teacher telling the boy at the front of the class to be, if you're smart boy, you'll be nice to them wild boys down the back, because you'll end up working for them one day, I can tell you. and so true it was, because it was all the guys that were, bored with school and couldn't wait to get out and start up businesses and do that, who were the ones that were causing the trouble, myself being one.
Oh, that's a great experience. But as I said, you had a bit of a turbulent last year in the sense that it was time to move to another school and finish off your education there.
Yeah, well, there were different times, and for various reasons, I was forced to leave my school and move from Blackrock to St. Paul's in Raheny, where I did the last 6 months of my study for my Leaving Cert. And it's probably the only reason I got it, because I had a fantastic teacher there called Ronnie McDonald, who used to literally he had to drive me to school every day, because that was the only way the school would let me in, was if he would vouch for me and literally drive me to school every day. And that he did. And he would teach me Irish in the car on the way in. And I found St. Paul's just a fantastic school. I was treated like an adult. They basically said, if you don't want to come to school, Mr. Joyce, that's your loss. You're the one that's going to miss out on the lessons, and you're the one that's not getting your Leaving Cert. Really, really don't care. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm getting treated like an adult instead of a brat. And I kind of liked it. And so I rose to the challenge then, and I managed to get my Leaving Cert, much to the amazement of everyone, my parents, but most surprising of all was me. So
there you go. So it's amazing. Education delivered in a different way can make such a difference.
Absolutely. And a couple of teachers that actually cared and took the time to say, maybe there's more to this little brat than just causing trouble. Maybe there's something in there, and I'll take the trouble to find it out. And I had a couple of teachers like that in my life who I suppose that's what teachers do. That's why they get into it, is so that they can change kids' lives. And two teachers certainly changed mine for the better in a big way. One of them, Ronnie McDonald, and another maths teacher I had, Mr. Courtney in Oaklands, who sat me down after school one day and explained, no, they're not really apples and oranges equaling X's and Y's. They represent things. And then I said, oh, is that what this is all about? And suddenly the penny dropped. And I was able to understand maths. And if it hadn't been for that wonderful Mr. Courtney, I never would have got it. And maths, of course, became such an enormous part of my life, running businesses and things later on, that he defined my career in many respects by enabling me to get my head around it.
The secret of maths was revealed to you.
Indeed.
A divine revelation. But you had a real sort of love of music, and this was to take you on a different path.
I did, yeah. Music was what I grew up with. Both my parents were in the music business in one way or another, and so I grew up in a musical household with music people in it the whole time. There was always sing songs. There was a grand piano in the front room that everybody was around every night, and people bringing in guitars and trumpets and saxophones. And so yeah, it was an integral part of who I was, and I'd been writing songs since I was 12, and I loved it, and that's all I ever wanted to be. And Adam Clayton was in the band. I think we played 2 gigs in our days at Paul's before he left for some other obscure group. I don't know whatever happened since then. But,
exactly.
A big mistake, obviously, leaving us. But I followed music and my love thereof into music promotion. I did a couple of concerts in Ireland, Thin Lizzy and Madness, and then I went to London and I worked in recording studios as a T-boy to start with, and eventually I got a couple of gigs as an assistant engineer and then an engineer and then a producer, and I worked at one hit in the UK with a fellow called Paul Hardcastle, who was one of Simon Cowell's victims, I suppose.
Proteges.
He was so mean to them, but so I worked with Simon on producing Paul Hardcastle's song 19, and I had just discovered this thing called a sampler. Nobody had a clue what they were in those days, but in this one I said, well, look, you could just take this word 19 that you say. In Vietnam they were 19 19, and nobody had ever heard this before, so it wasn't a particularly brilliant piece of anything, but it was unique at the time. So the song went to #1 around the world and propelled me for a short time to some notoriety in the musical industry in London, which I found to be fickle, to be honest, in the end, and not for me. So I returned to Ireland, and then I won a DJ competition, or came second in a DJ competition called the Big Kahuna on Sunshine 101. And they gave me my own radio program, which became the #1 rating radio program in Dublin as a result of Sunshine being so good. And that then led me on to visit a photographer friend of mine in London, where I met a guy from National Geographic who said, well, you should consider taking photographs for National Geographic, and we won't pay you unless we use them, but if you want to do it, we pay for your airfares. And at the same time, I bumped into Michael Parkinson in the BBC, and I said, look, I've got RTE have just put me through a training course for television presentation, and my radio program is doing really well. What do you think I should do? And he said, well, the first thing you should do is discover the best kept secret in the world. And I said, okay, and that is? And he said, it's a place called Sydney in Australia. He said, you're 24 years old, go there, discover that place and come back. And of course I was thinking, well, National Geographic pay for the airfares, take some photographs along the way. And so I resigned and took off around the world in 380 days. So a la Phileas Fogg, but with an extra 300 days to do it. And that was the plan when I was 25, and off I went.
Wow. There's so much to say in all of that, but certainly the sense of adventure was there, and also willing to find out more about different cultures. I mean, I presume you traveled all down through Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam and all of these sort of places. Yes,
we were planning to go to Russia, which we weren't let into at the time. It was just at the time of Gorbachev's major changes, so it was a bit unstable. We also had Burma on our list, and that was scratched as well. But we did, I got to India in 1988 and traveled overland down to Goa, from there to Hong Kong, and then Thailand down through Indonesia. So yeah, they were countries that people from Ireland in those days simply didn't know anything about and hadn't traveled to. And I was in a unique position that, in those days as well, airfares. I mean, I think the airfare that the air travel that I undertook in those days, the cost of it, you could do it today for about 1/10 of what it cost me 30 years ago, or 25 years ago. So back in those days, it was prohibitive for people to take trips like that. I was lucky. The guys from National Geographic were paying for that bit, and all I had to do was take photographs and send them back. So, and it was a great adventure.
No, I'd say it was. You must have had a ball of a time. You did eventually get to Sydney.
Yes, where unfortunately the registration of my address was brought to the attention of American Express, who said they actually wanted to get their money back. And that was a major inconvenience, because I was, freely spending this plastic money everywhere, and it was great. But so I had to knuckle down then and start working. The only thing I had was my camera, so I started taking photographs, and of course I didn't have a studio, so it had to be outdoors. What can you take photographs of outdoors that people will pay for? Well, buildings. So, and I'd always had a keen interest in skydiving in Ireland and in Spain before I'd left. So I used my experience in planes to get into aerial photography, and there weren't a lot of people doing it. There were no drones in those days. So I gained some notoriety as a photographer in Sydney for property companies, and at about the same time then Tony O'Reilly's son Cameron had come out. Kingsley Aikens was head of the IDA, and the three of us, I think, were a little bit taken aback by the view the Australians had of the Irish, which was that if they're Irish, they're bricklayers. They wander around in short pants with the crack of their arse shown. They drink from 12 o'clock on every day, and then they vomit down the back of a piano at about 7 o'clock before they fall home. And there was another side to Ireland, and we were very keen to portray that. And so we came up with the idea using my broadcasting experience and O'Reilly's advertising revenue and the IDA's access to Irish music, of doing an Irish radio program for Australia. And so that was born, and I did that for 16 years or so.
Wow.
And
a long time, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was great. And I had huge support. Jerry Ryan was on the program regularly. He used to extend the Ryan line for us. And it was great fun. But most importantly, I think what we were keen to do was to portray the Irish diaspora as being somewhat more than just the typical drunk paddy that you see in the pub, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So yeah, and then the photographic business kind of grew into a studio, and then I had a little bit of money coming in, so I was able to build a recording studio, which I knew how to operate from my days in London. And then we were able to do radio ads, and a couple of those won awards, and won me the Guinness. Started doing Guinness ads then on radio, and about the same time desktop publishing started. So I figured, well, if we can do the brochures and the press ads, then I can guarantee myself the photography, and then I'll be able to say, well, I'll do a whole campaign. I can do your press ads, I can do your brochures, and I can do your radio ads. And that basically morphed, vertically integrated is the technical term, into virtue advertising, which began in about 1990 in Sydney.
Wow.
And evolved into an online version with the advent of the internet in about 2006. I was a great evangelist for the internet in those days, telling people this thing is going to catch on, it's going to be big. And they were all saying, well, send it to something for our IT department. And I'm saying, no, it's not for your IT department. It's a marketing tool. Trust me, this is going to catch on. And I remember I did the speaker circuit then for about 2 years, just every single day I'd be out talking to hundreds of people, telling them this internet thing is going to catch on. And I suppose I became a bit of a celebrity advocate for the internet in Australia. And then it occurred to me that, hang on, the way advertising agencies compete with us, I mean, we had difficulty holding on to Guinness because there were multinational ad agencies that would say, well, we can look after Guinness all over the world, not just in Australia. So I thought, well, let's set up a multinational online advertising agency. And
as you do, of course, yeah.
Well, yeah, and then we can pitch for the bigger accounts. You know, we can go for the Coca-Colas and that kind of thing because we have a multinational presence. And so quickly set up offices, London, Dublin, New York, Singapore, as well as the head office in Sydney, which for 5 years had me traveling around the world 6 times a year, running those offices. Ended up with 90 staff in various different places, a back office in Mumbai in India. And at the time, I was going through a bit of a metamorphosis in my life. I had settled down, met a wonderful woman, and decided to start a family, got married, bought a house, and loved the renovation process of the house. That was something that had always been a hobby of mine, but now I found I got really passionate about it, and it was a way of exposing of exercising my creative side. And then when I had the house revalued and it was worth 3 times what I paid for it. I thought, well, there's money in this too, and it's a lot easier than trying to work traveling around the world, working 18 hours a day because somebody in some time zone is wide awake and they can only talk to me. I'm the only guy that can possibly solve this problem for them. So I thought, I'm going to give it up. I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to just concentrate on buying old houses, doing them up, and then going back and selling them or telling the bank they're worth more now. So can I have my initial equity back out, and I'll go and buy another one, and then the mortgage will pay for the remainder of the rent will pay for the remainder of the mortgage, because the property is now worth a lot more because of the renovation work, and my creative talents afforded me the ability to do that, and I loved doing that. And then, of course, our beautiful little Emily arrived into our lives, and I sold the business in 2000, which I'd love to say was genius, but it wasn't. Just before the dot bomb crash, but it was a complete fluke. It was just I'd had enough of it at that stage, and I wanted to concentrate on the property, and so I got out, luckily, at a good time. And then I just bought houses and did them up, and I loved that process. And we'd have a marvelous house right on the water in Sydney, and I could wander down to the end of the garden. There's a 150-meter long garden with a boat shed and a jetty on the end, and sit there with a beer at the end of the evening watching the sunset. And then I could row over to my little sailing boat, jump into that, and start up the engine and put around to the Spit restaurant and marina, have dinner there, and drive home legally, even after a glass of wine, because I wasn't driving a mechanically propelled vehicle. And it was a wonderful life. But then an opportunity came up in Hong Kong, and so they were going to pay for a house for us, and Emily was very young, so we thought, well, let's seize this one and see where it takes us, and ended up there for 7 years. And of course, as soon as I arrived there, Kingsley Aikens and Cameron's dad had set up the Ireland funds at that stage, and Kingsley was running them, so they were onto me to set up the Ireland Fund of China, which I did which is still going. I'm still the founding chairman and board member of the Ireland Fund of China, and is part of a huge and wonderful Irish benevolent society, I suppose, based out of New York now, and raising 200 million a year for various charities in Ireland. Its original mandate was to try and bring peace to the north of Ireland, and we set up a lot of the multi-denominational schools in the north and that kind of thing. So but my personal career then took me into investing in properties, not just in Australia, but in Hong Kong and in Thailand and Singapore, and of course a lot of the expat community worked in banking, and they were saying, if you've got debts, if you've got a mortgage in Australia and you're paying 6.5%, you could move that mortgage over to Hong Kong, where it's pegged to the US dollar, and you'd only be paying 1.5%. And so then I was thinking, this sounds interesting. And anyway, I learned all about foreign exchange and how it works and how it doesn't work, and how it can cost you your house very quickly too.
Oh yes, of course it can.
But I was lucky in that I had wonderful advice and access to magnificent research from some of the biggest companies in the world. So I was able to trade those two quite well. And we had a family tragedy in 2006. Unfortunately, little Emily left us. But we were blessed then in 2006 with the arrival of my first son, which was Jack, and he was followed in 2008 then by quadruplet babies.
Wow.
So that was very exciting, and of course impossible to give birth to in China, where there was a one-child policy and nobody had any experience of giving birth. So all my kids ended up being born in the States, because we had to fly over there. And that was all very exciting as well, of course, and returned to Hong Kong 2007 and decided I'd survived SARS there, and I covered that for Pat Kenny and Jerry Ryan, and I was still interested in broadcasting. There weren't any opportunities apart from bits like that in Hong Kong. And my wife at the time said, well, let's go to Ireland. You've got a huge family over there. At this stage now, I was 23 years out of the place, and I had always been very much in touch with my Irish roots. I'd set up the Ireland Fund of China. I'd set up the Irish Cup at Happy Valley Racetrack, and but it was exciting to come back to Ireland, and it was a new Ireland to which I was returning, because I'd left an impoverished country in the 1980s.
Sure.
With nothing going on, and I was coming back to this place that was going off like a 2-bob watch, and the Celtic Tiger was alive and well. So we thought, okay, this sounds interesting. But of course, as soon as they heard I was coming, somebody shot the Celtic Tiger.
There we go. Yeah. So you're responsible for putting the mocks on us all, is it?
I had Paul Keating open the internet company for me in Australia, and he said, so young man, it seems to me that when you arrived in Australia in 1988, that's when we had the recession we had to have. And it occurred to me then when I arrived in Hong Kong, they had SARS. And as soon as I came back to Ireland, somebody shot the Celtic Tigers. I say, I'm bad news, basically. Wherever I go, don't go there. Stay away.
So tell us, okay, now you're back in Ireland. Well, obviously you were clever enough to come back to a place where there were plenty of babysitters likely to be around for you.
Yes.
So there was some plan there. So tell me, back in Ireland, okay, really it's been chapter of moving from place to place and different career opportunities, but this is what we love doing. Tell us about what you've been doing since you came back and what your ambitions are for the future.
Well, I mean, my first priority obviously was to bring up my kids and make sure that they were settled into schools and do all that, which thankfully has been successful. But business-wise, I'd always had an interest in doing something good for the planet. Like the ad agency I told you, Virtue, the proudest thing I think I ever did there was when Rothmans approached me with a multi-million-dollar account and asked me would I take it on. I said no. Because I'd given up smoking and I knew how hard it was to do, and I knew this stuff kills you. And I said, I'm just not having any part of that. And then in the internet business, we were approached by various businesses selling online services that I did not want to be a part of. And there was huge money in it there as well, but I just didn't want to tell my grandkids that's how I made my money. And they're funny enough, as you know, as I grow older in my business career, they're the things that I'm most proud of. You know, the things that I didn't do that I could have done, because they were the hardest things to do, to turn away money. You know, but I'd always been. You know, I have a pilot's license and I have a scuba diving license, and I was always fascinated with the power of gravity and how it affects the atmosphere. You know, because it's fascinating when you think about it. And still, nobody, I mean, I spoke to Luke O'Neill about this only 2 weeks ago, and I said, can you tell me what causes gravity? And his answer was, get up the yard, I'm not a physicist. In other words, he doesn't know. And really, nobody actually does know what causes gravity. We know it's there, we can see its effects, but you know, it's a bit like God, and it's a bit like electricity. You know it's there because you could see its effects, but yeah, has anyone ever seen it? You know, the interesting thing about gravity, though, for me was, you know, when you look at the tides as they come in and out every day, that's caused by the oceans of the earth rising and falling in the middle, which pulls the sides in and out. And the amount of power it must take to get the Atlantic Ocean and lift it up by 3 meters. Imagine how much power is involved in that. And here we have it happening twice a day on our planet. And we know that the power is there. We know that this fluctuation exists every day and that it does change, and therefore it's moving. But nobody's ever tried to tap into that And I did research for years. Why is nobody doing this? And I eventually came to the conclusion that, well, why am I not doing it? And so I decided I would. And I've been working at that in the background for 15 years ago. It was the first time I took it to the Sorbonne in France, and I asked their physics department, if you have something which is neutrally buoyant, i.e. something which is floating the same distance from the surface, but beneath the surface of the ocean by perhaps 1 atmosphere, which is 10 meters, as the meniscus of the water, the level rises and falls, which pulls the tide in and out, what's going to happen to that body which is neutrally buoyant 10 meters below the surface? Will it remain in relationship to the bottom of the sea, or will it retain its relationship to the surface? And they didn't know the answer. And eventually they came back and they said, it's going to retain its relationship to the surface, which means that if you can plant something neutrally buoyant 10 meters beneath the surface of an ocean, it will go up and down. And I thought, well, that's a piston as far as I'm concerned, and let's tap into that. And then you can do it, of course, anywhere else where the land is cheap. So you can do it in a desert by creating a great big drum where the middle of the drum goes up and down, and the membrane pulls the springs on the outside like a trampoline in and out, and that again gives you pistonic effect. And I was lucky that I'd met some guys from Enterprise Ireland over the years and worked with them, especially with the Ireland Fund of China. They're a huge help. And they gave me a little bit of money then to do some serious research into this. And I met some intellectual betters of mine in Trinity College, professors of physics and things like that, who looked into this. And they recently came back with a document which is titled Proof of Concept. And it says that the harnessing mechanisms that I've put in place will generate at least double the electricity of solar or offshore wind per dollar spent. And that got me very excited.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have run out of time, Ken. I'm going to have to get you back again because I think we're heading into a whole new area, which is fascinating. Listen, Ken, where can people find out more about you?
Well, the creative services business is up and running again in Ireland now, and that's at kennjoyce.ie. And you can find out about Gravity Electricity at gravityelectricity.net.